Welcome everyone to today's seminar. It's called Disinformation, Misinformation, Malinformation, How to Tackle Fake News and Information Warfare in the EU. My name is Johanna Vehko. I'm a freelance journalist and a non-fiction author, and I will be hosting today's seminar, a couple of panel discussions and give you just a few words of introduction for the beginning. Can everybody hear me all right?
Not adequately.
Because I only have this mic for the stream, so that's all I've got. Yeah. Okay. Welcome again. Firstly, I will just run through the schedule for today so you know what's going to happen. First speaker will be Teija Tiilikainen, who's the appointed director of the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats. That's quite a long name for the centre. She will give a presentation in about 10 or so minutes. And after that, we'll go to a panel discussion about disinformation and disruption in elections and election meddling, election influence. That will be at approximately 1:45. And about 2:20, the editor-in-chief of the biggest newspaper in Finland, and not only Finland, but in the Nordics, Helsingin Sanomat, Kaius Niemi, will give a talk about the importance of media literacy and critical thinking. After his talk, we will have a break at about 2:45, about a 15-minute break. And after that, there will be a panel discussion about journalism in crisis and trust in journalism. At 3:30, we will have another panel about endangered democracy and the rise of populism in Europe and in Africa. And at the end, we're just going to conclude what we got from today, and Auli from Vikes will give you a few words, and then you will all be awarded in a grand way for attending today by some drinks in honor of Vikes, who is turning 15 today, which is why we're having this seminar. So Vikes is in Finnish Viestintä- ja kehityssäätiö, and in English it's called the Finnish Foundation for Media and Development. And it's been working in this field of media and development 15 years, as I say. I'm just going to give just a few opening remarks. As I say, I'm a freelance journalist, but I've been specializing in all things considered misinformation for several years now. I first wrote about misinformation and fact-checking in my book that came out in 2011, and since then I've been concentrating on this quite a lot. So I've done quite a lot of workshops for journalists and other professionals on fact-checking, digital tools for fact-checking, how to spot fakes online, how to trace photographs, how to trace people online, all those sorts of things. So I've been doing this quite a while, and since 2015 I've written a regular column called Valheenpaljastaja, the lie detector for the Finnish public broadcaster YLE. And that's probably why I'm hosting this day today. And just a couple of weeks ago I published this book. It's called the Lie Detector's Handbook, Valheenpaljastajan käsikirja, which is kind of like a very practical approach on misinformation, disinformation, fake news, propaganda, all these things. And it's aimed at the general public who is worried about determining what's real and what's not online. All my work over the years in this field with disinformation and misinformation, it kind of stems from just one idea. And I guess you could call it also an ideal with an L in the end. And that is that everyone should have access to accurate and trustworthy information. And everyone should have access to digital tools to determine what is real and what is not. And that's why I've written about this for public service media, because it's accessible to everyone, it's free, and I can do it in a way that can reach the biggest mass of people. In Finland, in schools, media literacy has been taught for quite a while, and critical thinking has been taught for quite a while. But the problem is how to reach grown-ups and older generations. And according to quite a few recent pieces of research, it's the older generations who share fake news the most on social media. And it's a big challenge how to reach these people, because they're not in anything like a school where you could reach a whole generation. So that's why I haven't thought of anything better than public service media to try and reach these people. So as a journalist, I think that this is a way to serve democracy, even though it might sound a bit sort of high and mighty, but I think that is the core purpose of what we do. I'm going to conclude with 3 points. The first one is that I think we will never get rid of disinformation and misinformation. So what we can do is we can only strive to kind of try and keep up with it, try and manage it somehow, and try and just to be 1 step behind and not 2 steps behind or 3 steps behind. Because misinformation will always find new avenues and new channels and new methods, and it will always go where people go. So we cannot win this fight, but we can try and manage it. And secondly, in this seminar today, we are going to just liberally use the term fake news. I'm sorry. But a lot of people would like to abolish this term. I don't agree with that, because I think it's something that people recognize, and I think it's a very, very short route to take to abolish all the terms that are being used against us by populists and people who spread disinformation. I think, if we stop using one useful term, then we'll have to stop using all the next terms, because they will also be hijacked by the people who are trying to use them against us. The main point about the term fake news is the word news, because what fake news is trying to do is to imitate news, to pose as journalism, even though it's not, even though its purpose is to mislead people. So if you use fake news in this context, it's accurate. But I also want us to talk about misinformation and disinformation in very accurate terms in any case. So if it's not a question of fake news, but other kind of disinformation, then let's just say what it is. So let's use accurate terms for everything. And the third point, disinformation and more broadly misinformation are very murky and vague areas of discussion. They are difficult to grasp and almost impossible to describe in a blanket way that would suit all countries and all situations. So books like I've just written and seminars like this one today are an effort to make sense out of this confusion. And so we need more things like this. Thank you and welcome. And I welcome our first speaker, Teija Tiilikainen. Please come over here.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to make this small presentation here. I'm very new in this position, so I cannot talk on the basis of a long experience about about hybrid threats, but as I have just finished my 10-year term, 2 times 5 years at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, I will try to use that experience also and try to put this hybrid threat concept into a broader international context. So I'm going to ask first, there is this argument that when we refer to hybrid threats, that in fact this is not nothing new, they have always existed, but why then do we address and focus on these hybrid threats so much just today? So what do we find in the present conditions and international and environment that makes hybrid threat, that makes this environment so favorable for hybrid threats? I will of course start by defining this thing, hybrid threat. What are we talking about when we talk about hybrid threats? And then I put it into context. And then finally I try to address the question that is also in the title, what are the possibilities for the European Union to face this phenomenon and to find the right, correct responses to that? How well equipped is the EU with these instruments available when it comes to responding and facing this hybrid threat environment? Okay, I will try to use 20 minutes. Hybrid action, we have several terms or concepts when we talk about hybrid influencing, we talk about hybrid action, we talk about hybrid threats, we talk about hybrid means. But the key thing is here at the end. What is the goal? So the goal is to affect a state's decision making, to steer that decision making to a certain direction, to affect the content of decisions being prepared or decisions taken. So this is the final goal. Someone wants to steer a state with its society to a certain direction with its decisions, be they decisions of international politics related to foreign policy, or they might also be decisions concerning domestic issues, affecting a state's decision making. This is what the goal is. And this is, of course, the goal that we find many times behind international politics. Power exerting influence in international politics is exactly this. So the goal is not new, and that's why we say that this is in fact nothing new in international politics. When a state or a non-state actor, be it a criminal terrorist organization, be it another type of actor, non-state actor tries to affect the decision making. But here the novelty deals with the means, and that's why we have this strange concept of hybrid, a mixture. This is a mixture, hybrid. So when one tries to reach this goal of exerting influence on decision making, one uses a set of non-traditional means. Non-traditional, now I refer to international politics, where we find the traditional means, which might be use of military power, diplomatic means, economic means. These are the traditional means that we know from international politics. And when we refer to hybrid, we refer to the use of less traditional, non-traditional means. And this is the phenomenon. Non-traditional means also used in as the first bullet point tells you, in a coordinated and synchronized manner. So this is what hybrid means. It's not that if we have a foreign state tries to affect the elections of another country, this itself is not hybrid. hybrid is when it's used in coordination, in a coordinated and synchronized manner with other instruments. And of course, we as democratic states, open societies with media freedom, open societies with a political opposition, we are hugely vulnerable for these kinds of influencing. Out of a sudden, we are in a situation when we notice that the cornerstones of the values and cornerstones of our societies are being used against us. The advantage of our values is being taken to exert influence and used against us. This is also, these are activities, if you think about your field, media freedom, how the whole media environment or information environment can be used, misused against a society, how critical infrastructure, the dependencies and vulnerabilities that we find in modern societies in their dependence on critical infrastructure, these vulnerabilities can be used, even military action in a way that it's in between the traditional forms of military, the use of military means and purely civilian action. If those kinds of instruments are used in a coordinated manner, it's very difficult many times, if we think about cyberspace, for instance, to detect who is there, who is exerting this influence. So that's why we also in our center say that the things related to attribution and detection are very difficult. It's difficult to point out who is behind this exerting of influence. That much about definition. It is not new, but the way it is being used and the way the cornerstones of our societies are being utilized for this exertion of influence. This is new. Oh, sorry, I was not supposed to use that. Go back. Some additions to what I said, and then I tell something about the big picture, and then to the EU. I already said that we are vulnerable, and it is exactly our values and the pillars of our society that make us vulnerable. But it's also, of course, the technological development which makes these hybrid instruments a phenomenon of our day. It is the way we are dependent on technologies, the way we are dependent on the cyberspace, and they provide new instruments for adversarial influencing. But also the fact that the actor structure is no longer that clear as it used to be in international politics. We talk about proxies. With proxies we refer to non-state actors, might be private actors like companies, might be criminal organizations, might even be individuals that are being used by state actors when it comes to exerting influence of this kind. So there might be a state actor behind. It might be basically a very traditional picture of international influencing, but the way it is exerted by using proxies, non-state actors, for instance, makes it different, makes attribution difficult, and is linked with this phenomenon. And this is what we are experiencing every day. Finally, there is also something in the broader international picture which makes these kinds of hybrid means very relevant for our times, and I want to point out A couple of things. We are experiencing a big change in our international environment. That is well known for most of us. We are experiencing a big change in the current balance of power. The current balance of power that you can think serves as the backbones of the current international order. So depending on the balance of power that lies behind, that the forms of that balance of power are then reflected in the values and norms and institutions that we are having at the international level. We are experiencing a change where power shifts from the West, from ourselves, Western actors, towards emerging new actors, where the rules and institutions that were established after the World War II are being challenged and are step by step being replaced by new rules, new values, and this is quite obvious that this will lead to a huge change. We are in the middle of the process. We don't know exactly where it leads us, but we see a gradual fragmentation of the order that was based on the post World War and post Cold War situation. This kind of a transition involves and implies instability, rules and norms being questioned, the order being questioned, and that kind of an international instability is being used by those who want to change the order. So this functions in the benefit of those who want to change this order. That's why we see actors such as China or Russia empowered by the situation, by the environment where the transition is taking place. This is not only a transition that is reflected at the international level. At the international level, we see it in our societies as a polarization, a new type of polarization of also our Western societies. The ideal societal model is not that clear or shared anymore. These new powers bring in new models and that are also dividing our societies. And this kind of polarization also provides a fertile ground for foreign influencing. So this is also how our big picture favors this phenomenon of new type of influencing on our society's decision-making, elections, via social media, via traditional media, and all the other means. But 2 points which perhaps are not that well known or that much addressed in the public debate is that I also tend to argue that there is something in the authoritarian regimes that encourages them to go into this phenomenon and take the advantage of hybrid influencing. Authoritarian, non-democratic regimes cannot rely on democratic means when it comes to safeguarding their support base. So they have to find other means in order to consolidate, safeguard their support base, and these means are linked with hybrid influencing. They want to point out weaknesses in adversaries. They want to use foreign policy tools to legitimize their power and the forms of that power. So it is somehow inherent in their character that they need these or are inclined to use these hybrid instruments. On the Western side, we have communities such as the EU and NATO that are vulnerable, that are affected, that are targets for this influencing these communities, including their member states, but they themselves being targets, but they are also very complicated legal and political systems when it comes to concerted strategic action. So it's not very easy for them to defend themselves against this phenomenon, against which they are vulnerable. So these I would argue are more inherent in the big picture, which also function in favor of hybrid influence. Okay, then I say something about the EU, and then it's, I think, the time for the panel to pick up issues. I said that it's difficult for the EU and NATO as collective communities to defend themselves, their values and their structures against hybrid influencing. But still, there are many political processes, many things going on, and now I strongly focus on the EU because that is more my field of study for a long time. There are many things going on which we perhaps don't know that well since 2012, 13, 14, when the EU started to recognize this phenomenon and wanted to create better policies and instruments to deal with it, to protect its own societies, to protect its own vulnerabilities, and also to protect its own values from this hybrid influencing phenomenon. We have seen quite a number of new bodies being created to the EU for policy coordination, for new responsibilities, new expertise. So the EU by now has become quite experienced when it comes to creating expertise. And of course, our Center of Excellence it's not an EU body directly, but it has been established by a number of member states of EU and NATO to provide expertise in this field. So the Hybrid Center of Excellence belongs to these new bodies that have been established recently. If we look at the field of communication, disinformation, critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, we see a lot of new legislation, either proposals for new legislation or finalized pieces of new legislation. This is, of course, a powerful instrument in the hands of the EU to legislate so that the member states would create preparednesses, reserve systems, rapid alert systems, all of that to cope with the phenomenon of influencing, to deal with its own vulnerabilities and to diminish them. So a couple of weeks ago, I looked at all these legislative processes, and I was quite surprised to see that quite a lot of them have been launched and also finalized to protect the EU states and their societies. Of course, this critical infrastructure field is something that is an obvious target for this influencing, and if you think how many cross-border systems there are in terms of energy networks, electricity networks, the cyberspace, harbors, sea routes of communication, all these parts of critical infrastructure, when misused and attacked, that provide huge problems for the member states. So these need to be protected, systems of cooperation created in the EU to protect them. But also, of course, this is not only for the state actors to equip themselves against hybrid influencing. It must involve private sector. It must involve organizations, non-governmental organizations. I think you are there. Awareness must be increased. Situational awareness must be increased. this is nothing that the state actors can do just by themselves. We have to involve broad societal actors, and that's why the whole of government approach and the more comprehensive approach of resilience building is so important here. And I can only stress also your role in this respect, of course. The final thing, this is the final thing. Somehow I think that this awareness about elections and how in a way the solemn part of our societies, our right to the integrity of our elections and the integrity of the public will has been used by foreign actors to steer decision making to a certain direction. I think this must be in the core of this phenomenon that we must address. In the Cold War era, we remember in this country how the Soviet Union tried to influence our domestic decision making, and it was afterward the lesson that we learned that we must safeguard the integrity of our political decision making. And now out of a sudden we are in a situation where we realize how social media platforms and how the elements of open society are being used to influence elections, electoral campaigns and electoral debates, and even the setup of topics in elections. So really this threat comes to the core and reaches the core of our societies and democracy. So there also the EU has established, has tried to be as instrumental as possible to increase awareness and to launch several forms of cooperation among and between its member states to address this phenomenon. Financing, of course, is important. There is no hybrid influencing without financing, and of course this is a world of itself. But anyway, the EU has been legislating in this field as well, and tried to build resilience against radicalization and violent extremism by separate networks. So I will finish here by just concluding that even if basically this is nothing new in international politics, this is what international politics has always been: states trying to affect each other's decisions and decision making, steer their policies to a certain direction. But this time, when this influencing takes place, taking advantage of our societies and their in a way their positive, good, well-recognized elements, I think this is the thing which brings this phenomenon of international politics so close to all of us and our societies with their core values, and that's why it's so important to address by cooperation, by being just one step behind, or how was it said, not two, the adversaries, trying to detect their plans and the instruments. Thank you so much.
So we have a few minutes, so if you have questions for Teija Tiilikainen, we have time for a couple of questions. Please.
My name is Lance.
Istu me vaan.
I've been thinking over this issue of vulnerabilities, attacking communication lines, sabotaging ports, airports, and all kinds of things. And way back in the 1980s, when a Pakistani computer scientist, developed the virus, the computer virus, I believe that that is where the origin of this whole vulnerabilities to computers and communication systems began. And now, at that time, the world was not so much interconnected. There was not even the internet yet. But it has now become so interconnected. And what I've been expecting was that maybe nations could rather enter into a non-aggression pact, so to say. Just like we have this nuclear treaties against nuclear war and so on, I was expecting that maybe nations could also begin with such a non-aggression pact that systems should not be attacked, and some kind of agreement would be drawn or a treaty would be entered into such that nations would not use communication lines or try to sabotage each other's communication systems. I don't know whether this is feasible or not.
I think this is a very good question, and I think in this era when we are in the middle of a power transition, there is perhaps not yet that kind of a willingness. It seems to me that very much on the contrary, also existing agreements of non-aggression in the field of nuclear non-armament, for instance, they are collapsing instead of becoming further extended or consolidated. So it's a part of this transition that really no one, at least if we talk about the great powers, wants to tie its own hands too much before perhaps they are willing to see the end game and what comes out of this, what their own position in this new setup is. But this is when you point out this would be the ideal situation where these kinds of new threats would be identified, and if world would be a more peaceful place, all the powerful actors together would point out the joint threats, and then they would make binding agreements how to address these threats. But unfortunately, this is not the case. But when you refer to the cyber field, there is this argument coming from the US today that when the nuclear non-armament treaties are collapsing, the reason why the big states let them collapse, one of the arguments from the US is that because these armament, these types of old-fashioned armaments form just a minor part of today's armaments. So it's exactly the cyber field that should be regulated and become the target of agreements. But all of those who want to take advantage of this field now are not willing to tie their hands to agreements yet. But I suppose we might see the day when this field becomes internationally as much regulated as any other field that can be used in an aggression towards other actors.
We have time for another question. Anyone?
If not, then in that case I would ask the next panelist to join me up here. We have three panelists. We have Mikko Salo, come over here, from Faktabaari, Finland, Finnish fact-checking site. And we have Jussi Toivonen, who is the leading communication specialist from the Finnish Prime Minister's Office. And we have Naja Bentsen, who's a researcher at the European Parliamentary Research Services. I would first like to ask each and every one of you to describe your work, because I'm not sure everyone here is familiar with everything you do. Maybe let's start with you, Naya. What is the job of a researcher at European Parliamentary Research Services?
My job, do I need to use the...
Yeah, you do.
Hello everyone, and welcome, and thank you for coming, and thank you very much for inviting me. My job is researching disinformation related issues, and also certain countries such as Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova and other Eastern Partnership countries, plus the Arctic. What I do is I respond to questions from our members. I work in the members' research service, so they can send us questions and we then respond to them in the form of either tailored analysis, written briefings, or we can also do in-person briefings where we come to their offices, for example, to explain certain topics. We publish some of our work, and but the most part of what we do is not published, so it's confidential, and we don't disclose the questions or who has asked the questions.
Thank you. And what about you, Jussi? What do you do at the Prime Minister's office? Is it confidential?
Not at all. Yeah, the work we are doing is very open and transparent. That's the way we need to do it. So my main duty is to coordinate our ministry's activities to counter hostile information activities targeted at Finland. For example, when we are talking about elections, that was one of our key tasks during the past year, how to protect our electoral system and how to support our democracy. But most of the days I'm traveling around, training civil servants, meeting foreign colleagues and coordinating our activities. So during the past couple of years, me and my colleagues, we have trained to over more than 10,000 civil servants, brief journalists. We have given lectures and we have been training and so forth. So it's kind of ongoing work for us to raise the awareness of the people and also be prepared.
And what about you, Mikko? What is Faktabaari?
Okay, Faktabaari is a Finnish fact-checking. Is this okay? Hello? Is it better? So, Faktabaari is a Finnish fact-checking service established 2014. We started with the European elections at those days. It has so evolved towards the basically kind of center where it brings together people who are really worried about the disinformation problems and the information disorders. And we are mostly nowadays, in between the elections that we have covered, all of them, 6 of, we are mostly focused on kind of internet literacy. And what we try to do now is that we try to reveal a little bit what's the world we are living in, and it's a very complex situation actually, and we might probably go there a little bit afterwards. I have also a background in the civil service for about 15 years in EU level. I live in Brussels and I have had a chance to contribute, for example, with Ricardo to the EU approach that we might discuss as well. Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, I hope you heard, yeah, okay, sorry.
So let's go into elections then, and election meddling. Jussi, you mentioned how you had been working before we had parliamentary elections, and then of course the EU Parliament elections recently in Finland. And you gave quite a lot of interviews for the media about how Finland was preparing for possible disinformation campaigns and election meddling. Tell us a little about that, because I understand it was like an unprecedented level of preparation.
Yeah, I could talk for hours about this issue. One of the best feedbacks I have received that it's an unbelievable guy that he can speak same time when he's inhaling and exhaling. So what we did, first of all, we gathered around the same table different actors, different authorities who are involved in organizing the elections. And then the first thing was to strengthen our cooperation. In Finland, we have the old concept called comprehensive security approach we've been developing since the Second World War. So we didn't invent anything new. Instead, that we looked at our strengths and also where our weaknesses, and of course we improved them. But the cooperation was the first thing, and the second thing that we needed, important to raise the awareness of the people and also civil servants and also political parties, and then to establish connections with the social media companies. That was one of our tasks. And as part of the election preparedness activities, we had our first communications campaign targeted to wider public. The headline of the campaign was, or the name of the campaign was, that Finland has the best elections in the world. Why is that? Because we are so humble nation. We wanted to remember. The reason was that we wanted to remind people that we've been running over 110 years successfully elections, even in difficult circumstances, so that people can trust on our elections. And our election system is very robust. We still have the paper, pencil, and the voting booth, and that's impossible to hack. Because we saw that the biggest threat was that someone tries to cast a shadow over our elections, so that people would trust the election result or the election system, that they start thinking about there is something weird in our system. We wanted to remind people that our election system is very safe. And we also did a lot of cooperation, especially with our Swedish colleagues. We changed the information and learned a lot of what they did. And we published a handbook on how to counter hostile information activities. And there was a lot of things we did: training, briefing, raising awareness, and also strengthening our cooperation.
In Sweden especially, they had elections a few months before we did. And there especially, there was a lot of disinformation about election fraud, alleged election fraud. Was that something that you observed in Finland? Was that sort of thing spread around social media? There
were a few tweets, so it was very, very minor, not in that extent what was in Sweden, for example. But that was one possibility we thought beforehand, that could happen also in Finland. For example, during the election day, when the election vote counting is going on, then just a DOS attack shuts down the Ministry of Justice election result site, and then the stories would just start appearing and spreading. But that didn't happen. But that was one of the scenarios we prepared. We also put a tinfoil hat on our heads and thought other possibilities, that what would I do if I would try to harm our election system? That was to keep one of the quick questions we asked from ourselves. And did any of those scenarios come true? No. Before the election there was one DOS attack, but the election day was very calm. So we were prepared. And also it's good to remember that a couple of years ago we had presidential elections and we were already prepared at that time. So this is kind of ongoing activity. It's not only about elections, but we are all the time looking a little bit what's happening tomorrow and the day after that, and thinking in advance that what could affect on us. So nothing happened? Nothing happened, yeah. So does that mean that malicious actors are not interested in meddling with our elections? No, I think what we did, that we didn't look in the beginning we described that we are not looking only after the state actors, because the lessons we learned from the Swedish elections and from the Baltic elections, that individuals, even domestic ones, could become actors. And that's why we adopted kind of a 360-degree approach, so that we were not looking after there is Russia behind every single tweet. Instead, that we wanted to know and learn about the methods disinformation is spread around in our society. And also when we discuss with the candidates, so for example, online harassing, targeting, that was a kind of new phenomenon. Maybe it's been earlier, but this time it became more obvious. The social media tools they are free for everyone. Yeah. Yeah. There was research by the Oxford Internet Institute after the Swedish election, and actually this research, it was about tweets, so only about Twitter, but which is not the whole picture of social media, as we know. But this research found that vast majority of the disinformation spread on Swedish Twitter just before the election was homegrown. So the Russian disinformation was minuscule in comparison. Is that something that maybe, I'm also looking at you, Naya, now, that is this something found in other European countries? Or how do you see the sort of broad field of election disinformation?
Yes, I definitely does as well. Yes, I definitely think that you can find a similar scenario in many other European countries. What the EU is focusing on with the, for example, with the East Stratcom Task Force is, of course, their mandate is to detect and analyze pro-Kremlin disinformation. So they do not go into detail about the homegrown disinformation in individual member states.
So let's get into EU parliamentary elections.
Just perhaps comment a bit on the elections side. I think, for example, Finnish authorities did a lot of preventive work, and I think that in a way already helped a lot. So I was a little bit, let's say, frustrated seeing that nothing really happened, boring, because that is exactly what it was meant to be. And we know that we are far from ready if something really would happen, and we have to prepare further. But so that really helped, and also on the European level there has been many seminars that next to preventive action that really happened in all networks, some are far from ready, even during the elections. And then the other one was the kind of narrative building, and that obviously, at least on the European level, was really considered that now we had a story, we had something to mobilize as well. And that's for the state authorities, for the politicians to go for that one, and that really helped. But there was, and then the third point basically there, that actually we don't really know what happened. And that's the biggest thing, because we don't have the access to the social media data yet. And this is something what we work with Ricardo and many of the people tried to fight, that we have to get the access to really keep the big platforms accountable, because I mean now we speculate, we don't really know what happened. Everybody was relieved in Brussels, because of course the speculations was, as you said, like something could happen and really radical shifts, but we kind of more or less survived. But now it's a very much the momentum to kind of prepare for the next phase, and that can be much more serious.
Naya, did you want to comment on that?
No, I just wanted to add to what you just said, that of course it's not enough to focus on elections, because after the elections is before the elections. So disinformation attacks are not only focusing on election times, they are also using the slow effect of constantly inserting conspiracy theories or other destructive narratives into our information ecosystem. So I think this is a very, very important point, that we cannot limit our analysis or our monitoring to pre-election times.
And I just want to add that what we author is just a minor thing. I think the best reason why Finland has been so able to fend off, for example, disinformation campaigns targeted at Finland, so it's our society. People are really literate. Media literacy taught at the school since the 1970s. Finnish media is doing excellent job. People trust on traditional news media. We are the most happiest country in the world, even though we don't believe it by ourselves. But still, our society, there are many things.
The most humble, as you
say. Most humble, yes, yeah. But so that we also, what we do is just a minor thing. So I think that real life heroes are the kindergarten teachers and the Finnish media journalists.
Let's get into EU-related disinformation. This is something I'm sure all of you know quite a lot about. I'm going to start with Mikko, because Faktabari has been working a lot with EU-related disinformation. Can you describe what is it like?
Let me see now. So, kind of little historical overview could be that when we started, we considered that could be the topic, because I mean EU is pretty defenseless. I mean nobody's kind of going for it. I mean, it's a classical heads of state coming home and what they won in Brussels, and so there was a lot of myths just going and going, and in 2014 it was still more or less like a misinformation partly, and already the kind of tabloid phenomenon that basically led to partly to the Brexit in UK. It has very much now developed into that's a kind of a narrative, and this is probably the link to the Russia as well, because I mean if there is an existential motivation for somebody to divide and rule. So for example, there is one actor that has it, so it has become much more violent in a way, and especially in the Central Eastern European countries. I think we haven't faced nearly nothing compared to what is it at the Central Eastern European colleagues. I think we have a Ukrainian colleague who might be able to describe how is it really to be in the forefront, but basically the same things are coming to here. We are still a bit protected with the language and yes, the society and basically the government working for a common threat.
I think I would like to add to that not all anti-EU disinformation is labeled EU or anti-EU. I think that the very broad narrative is also anti-democracy messages, and I think it makes perfect sense, because authoritarian state actors, as you just pointed out before, what are they most afraid of? Everything that they are attacking, they are afraid of freedom of speech, and they are basically afraid of democracy. So of course they are attacking that. I think that in that sense our vulnerabilities are also our strengths. And I think that the overall messages are, of course, decaying West, which is a very old narrative. Elites versus the people, which that's always great, isn't it? When you can say it's because they're in power and they don't think about me or us. Threatened values, lost sovereignty, threatened national identity. That works in almost every country. Imminent collapse of the EU and NATO, and then sarcasm and ridiculing, and I think many of these narratives are also echoed in Ukraine, for example. So I think that many of the overall narratives are not focusing specifically on, of course they are tailored to specific audiences, but I think they are very recognizable. Everything that we hear in Ukraine at some point will also hit us. So I think we can learn a lot from Ukraine in that sense.
Imminent collapse of the EU is something that I kept hearing about when I lived in the UK 10 years ago. And so that brings me to the inevitable question of Brexit and disinformation. What can you say about that, Naya?
Well, what can I say about that? I can say that the scale, it's still. I did read the paper this morning, but I don't know if there is any ground-shattering, earth-shattering news about Brexit. I know that 3.5 million British pounds were spent on Cambridge Analytica by the Leave campaign. I think that speaks volumes about the investment that was made into that. And I think what Mikko said about the misinformation, the way it started with seemingly innocent Euro myths that were not disinformation. They were simply misunderstandings, or not simply, they were misunderstandings combined with an urge or a need to make headlines.
Well, some of them were actually created by Boris Johnson when he was working for newspapers.
Exactly.
So, what has the EU done to combat fake news and disinformation? What kind of measures has the EU taken?
Well, the EU has done quite a lot. You have already mentioned some. The EU, the Council asked the External Action Service or the High Representative Vice President to create a task force to look into or to counter the Kremlin's disinformation in 2015, and they were set up in September, I think, 2015. And since then, a lot has happened. Apart from the different hybrid policies, the EU set up a high-level expert group, which I believe you were part of, right? So, and you as well? Okay. And then a lot has happened. In 2018, the Commission published a communication on the European approach to online disinformation. In December, the action plan was published, and the rapid alert system was set up also in March last year, I think, or this year. The EU has also, of course, engaged in financing tools to detect and to detect disinformation and images, videos, a long list of different projects. Would you like to add anything, Mikko?
I would say that there was the first phase of all our work was also kind of characterized by the elections once again, but we even tried to, this is not going to end anything. That's when the politicians are interested because it's the elections, but I mean, this has to continue. And so the first phase was really to mobilize all kinds of networks, and I see basically the hybrid center as the kind of the civil service government type level, kind of security driven network, but then there was others that take more time to come, and there are more coming. And I would actually encourage all the journalists in the room and everybody to kind of very much follow what is supposed to happen in the, let's say, next 100 days, starting when we have a new commission, because there is if you look at the eyes of what I have been following the disinformation for a while, so EU is trying to get geared for really, let's say, challenging the current problems and also the technology. They are talking about technological sovereignty. That is actually pretty much unknown term in Finnish vocabulary, and there is a really like addressing the tech platforms. We are talking about the competition policy. This is something that doesn't come too much in the Finnish debate, but I would really love to people to follow it. Now we are talking about Macron challenging, let's say, the NATO or something like that. But I mean, we can be in many opinions. Does he do it for himself or something like that? But he's addressing at least the right problems. And if anyone wants to have a very good view of this one, this is about the micro-targeting and privacy, the age of surveillance capitalism, the fight for a human future at the new frontier of power. So this is a Harvard scholar who has really analyzed the thing, and I mean, this is not a nonsense book, not in the way that if you hear, for example, Vestager talking, that is still the most powerful person in the commission, of course, after von Leyen, she's already referring to this type of things. So I would really encourage to see what is coming and to adapt to that one and be sure to follow the EU level, because we do what we can in Finland, but these type of things are to be solved at the EU level minimum. Mostly global, but minimum, and even the US and authors and scholars are coming to EU and Brussels now that please do something about it.
Naya.
Yes, thank you, Mikko. For mentioning Shoshana Zuboff, I just wanted to add actually that we held a panel discussion in the European Parliament a couple of months ago. She participated via Skype, and she actually said that the EU is our only hope, because the US, nobody expects the US to undermine its own tech giants. That's logical. And the code of practice, which I think we have not mentioned yet, is crucial in this context, and that was what Shoshana Zuboff was mentioning. The online platforms have drawn up a self-evaluation report on their behavior ahead of the elections. The results are mixed. Facebook, for example, is right now under fire over its decision to let politicians post any claims that they want in ads without fact checks. Many of these companies are not very good, as you also mentioned, Mikko, at sharing data with not only the public but also with researchers. And the progress varies a lot between the different signatories of the Code of Practice. And the Commission is right now analyzing the results and will publish their assessment early next year and then decide whether or not to regulate. And this is unprecedented because no state actor has ever put this much pressure on the online platforms. I think it speaks also volumes that Facebook, for example, does not have a representative in Finland.
No, they have in Stockholm.
They have one in Stockholm,
Nordic
yeah.
reps, indeed.
As far as I'm concerned, Facebook does not have a representative in Ukraine either. At least they did not have a representative in Ukraine ahead of the elections the last elections, which
They have people to sell advertisement here,
Yeah.
but I mean, that's about it. So
yeah.
tell us a little bit the approach to the news ecosystem.
Exactly, and I think this is exactly why the EU can do more than the individual member states. So, and this is exactly why scholars like Shoshana Zuboff expect the EU to take responsibility and be the ethical decision maker that it can be.
Just to clarify, code of practice might be a very abstract for many, but that's a kind of that's a follow-up of the high-level group and then the commission to push the platforms supervised by a journalistic body. You are there, Ricardo, aren't your organization, to kind of for self-regulatory approach first. I mean, things go step by step, but now the evaluation, is that enough? Can they handle it by themselves? My personal guess is that not with that one, and I mean that's pretty much the Brussels view, and so now what's the famous smart regulation that even Facebook is already subjecting it to, and what's the responsible action at the moment when we really don't know what is happening in the platform? I mean, I'm not going to praise Twitter, but at least the Twitter put the kind of election ads, the kind of, we are not going to let that go because we don't know what is happening. So that's a kind of a precautionary principle that we haven't seen from the others. And they go with the same debates. They talk about the freedom of speech, so this is really relevant for Vikes or something like that. You have to kind of link for the next 15 years. And I will give you this one as a present, but this is the kind of digital reality where we have to link.
The code of practice is, it's interesting, the self-evaluation. I looked at it the other day, and for example, Facebook is saying that, oh yes, we look at all the hate speech complaints that we get. We look at almost all of them within 24 hours, like you ask us to. Well, yes, probably they do, but do they actually read them in is there anybody who actually speaks Finnish who actually looks at the Finnish complaints? For instance, I myself have made a number of those complaints during just the past few days, and yes, I got the response back very quickly, but it was always, this does not violate our terms, and these were pretty clear fake profiles and pretty clear hate speech. So what is, how is the EU going to tackle the fact that they don't actually, they just, it's a bit of a sort of polish on top.
I think there is many ways, but I mean, one is just that these giants own so much data, and that's a big question. The Finnish presidency is, I think the two entry points to this question is to some extent the hybrid center, and the other one is called human-centric data economy, and there is a My Data seminar was here, and I think there is a follow-up in some way, and that to me presents the kind of let's say what the consumers and journalists and all that should follow is that we own our data, or if we own our data, we can be the masters of our future, so to say, but this is the big level, and for that one we are talking about, for example, competition policy. Are they too big at the moment? So this is the type of level of debate. Then there are many other more smart, targeted things that probably Nadia wants to describe. But I think the how to make the game changer and how to kind of push the giants, because in the way, at least in the short term, we need them for the efforts as well.
Jussi, you had a
Mikko mentioned about the data they own. I have one question to you. Raise your hand if you have a profile on Twitter, Facebook, Google, Instagram, etc. When you opened your profile, did you read those terms of use? Raise your hand. Yeah, that's usually so that we are allowing these companies to because that's why we need to inform also the wider public that when they create, for example, they open Facebook profile, so the newsfeed it just appear from nowhere. Instead, there is a logic behind it, and we can talk a lot about hybrid threats, disinformation, etc. But at the end, it's the individual who is sitting in front of his or her computer. If he or she doesn't have any clue how the modern information environment works or social media works, then then it's no use. We need to educate the people, also from the youngsters till the elderly.
I would like to sort of, Naya, if you have a quick comment to that.
Just a very quick comment to link with freedom of expression, that freedom of expression also includes freedom to form our opinions. I think this is something that is often forgotten, and at the moment the public space where we form our opinions is heavily monetized by these platforms. It's not a neutral space.
I would like to ask at the end of this panel, because I want to have a few minutes for audience questions, but I would like to conclude with kind of like putting this problem to perspective, because I know Naya, for example, does have a bit of data that she can share with us. There's been this debate going on about disinformation and fake news for some years now, and of course it invites quite a lot of criticism and maybe diminishing of the problem in the public debate. And so I would like you to put a bit of context to this, like how big is this problem really? How big is disinformation, use of bots, fake news? What can you tell us about that? Because we do know that it's quite difficult to get the data.
Yes, exactly. As we've just touched upon a couple of times, we are relying on the online platforms to share all this information with us. But a recent report, for example, has shown that just to highlight the number of state actors who engage in foreign influence operations, at the moment there are 7. That we know of. It's China, India, Iran, Pakistan, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Facebook and Twitter have taken action against so-called cyber troops from these countries who are engaged in foreign influence operations. And it's very difficult to say how strong they are in terms of people, in terms of funding. One figure from China says that they have a permanent team which has a size of between 300,000 and 2 million people. They are distributed across local and regional offices. Venezuela, for example, has multiple brigades of about 500 people, and there is evidence that they have had some kind of formal training. We know that Myanmar, there is evidence that their cyber troops have received formal training in Russia. And about 10 times, and here we are only talking about foreign influence operations, but 10 times as many countries are actually involved or engaged in influencing their own audiences by manipulating social media. So that is an increase of 150% from over the last 2 years, from 28 states in 2017 to 48 in 2018 to 70 in 2019. But again, we have to take these figures with a grain of salt, because we have also increased our attention to these phenomena. We have much better detection skills than we used to have. The social media companies are also under pressure to give us more information about this. So it's very, very difficult to quantify and compare with previous figures. But I think it's safe to say that the phenomenon is on the rise.
Thank you for that very clear explanation of the quantity. We have a couple of minutes for audience questions, and after that Gaius will talk to us. Who wants to go first? Anyone? If not, then we'll just continue for a couple more minutes. Mikko, you had a comment?
No, I will not even very well describe that, what we really don't know, but I mean what is assumed, and so it's all about like getting to know that, to the bottom of the things before you don't really know to regulate it efficiently as well. But I would go to once again to the structure of the things, and the whole news ecosystem is practically working on an ad-based environment. So I mean that's what is happening, that the reality is distorted by this same thing. I mean they don't go to your websites directly, they go mostly to the websites through the algorithms. I think this is discussed later as such, but basically that gives the distorted picture, and in worst case it really goes for the kind of famous polarization, and it's not, we cannot blame the platforms of everything, but they basically give more the same, and I mean that's how they kind of polarize the society, and this is something that we have to take into consideration. And as a mental proof, I mean always when we are talking Facebook and Google, or even Twitter, so I always like replace it with a advertisement company, and then I'm thinking that if I would give the rights to an advertisement company, how would I protect myself from the advertisement company, because I still want to, so to say, take back control, to use the famous slogan, and decide what, but it needs a really much effort, and at the moment there is no competition for that one, and that's something where you have to start.
Just a quick last question to all of you. In the field of disinformation, we always have to look at the future so we can prepare. So what, in your view, is going to happen next in the field of disinformation or fake news? Nobody wants to go
the
first.
Oracle, okay. No, but I mean, have a look what the new commission is coming in let's say February and March. And yes, I mean, if you have a strong say as a journalist, empower Ricardo to lobby for that, and I mean, we do our best to kind of keep a strong scrutiny, because I mean, if the Commission is not able to present a credible, let's say, roadmap, and I think it's going under the democracy roadmap, and this tells what's at stake. So if that's not going to be credible, so I think we will have a very hard time in the next 4 or 5 years, because the technology is developing so quickly, and if we are not able to get the grasp of it, so then it's a really complex. And don't try to just like, this country is doing that or Macron is doing that. Are they doing the right thing? And keep in mind privacy and micro-targeting, so we are already in the let's say on the right track.
Jussi.
I think every country should find their own ways to counter this phenomenon. It's not going to disappear anywhere. For us, our Finnishness is an asset. So what we are doing, it suits for us. We can learn from each other, but still, at the end, we need to figure out what's the best way to protect ourselves. And I think that we are talking quite a lot about how much debt we are leaving to our children, state debt we are leaving to our children, and what shape our environment is tomorrow. But at the same time, we should discuss about what our democracy will look tomorrow, what kind of democracy we are leaving behind, what kind of political debate culture we are leaving, because people are watching what the politicians are talking about and how they are behaving, and the people are learning and adapting. So hopefully, I've been following the political discussion recently, and I haven't been very happy about it. Facts should matter.
Yes, I can only agree that facts should matter, and we really have to make sure that everyone is enlightened, and that everyone has the possibility to check facts for themselves. I think it is something that is taken for granted at the moment, that everyone, we talk about media literacy a lot. I think we should also focus on basic literacy, because in the EU, 1 in 6 people have reading difficulties, which means that when they read, they're not able to quickly abstract and compare and go to the about section and check with other sources. They cannot do that because they are busy just reading the headline, just making sense of the headline. And that is 1 in 6 Europeans. And this is something that I don't think that we can, I think it's a major risk that people are not aware of because they focus on other risks. So I think we have to look at our own vulnerabilities. The techniques are evolving, actors are learning from each other, new actors. It's also a business. We haven't talked about that either, but disinformation is also big business. It really pays off not only ideologically, but also financially. So we can expect more to come on board because this is great for everyone who is not interested in democracy. So we have to look at our own vulnerabilities. And we have to get everyone on board, even the elderly, as you mentioned. I know that actually in Denmark there was a project launched by the, I don't know what it's called in English, the Elderly's lobbyist organization. They had actually created a media literacy project, which I hadn't seen it in other countries, but I think this is definitely something that one could consider replicating perhaps.
Thank you very much to all our panelists. Next, the editor-in-chief of Helsingin Sanomat, Kaius Niemi, will give us a speech. Just as he's preparing, I'll tell you a couple of things that I forgot to say earlier. If you're tweeting about this or posting on social media, please use the hashtag Vikes15. And what was the other one? Vikes Seminar. So there's two. Here you go. And also there's Wi-Fi here. The password is there on this pillar, but it is the username is ec-guest and the password is ec-visitor. But you can see all the sort of big and capital, small and capital letters, how they are from that pillar. Thank you, and we'll let Kaius go ahead.
All right, thanks, Johanna. And first of all, congratulations for Vikes, for the anniversary. 15 is great. I'm very happy to be here. I can see so many familiar faces, so I think we all are sort of like, in belief already. So I probably touch things that are very familiar to you. But it's a very important thing. I was very happy to sort of like being invited with the idea to ask, like, can we learn to recognize the truth from lies, and the importance of media literacy and critical thinking. That's pretty much what most of us are actually trying to do on everyday basis, to think that how do we develop the way of understanding. Understanding the societal changes and also trying to develop the way people are able to read in the way that they are enticed to read and on factual basis. So let me first turn to quite far away, the foundation for our civilization, so to say, in Finland. I think it was cast already in the 16th century. There was this thing called kinkerit, lukukinkerit in Finland. So you could actually get to be able to marry someone if you could be able to read, at least to read well. So, at least to say some verses, some biblical verses and so forth. And I think on this basis it was possible to build a kind of a workable and operational learning obligation in Finland. And Finland turned 100 years a couple of years ago, and if we look back in 1917-18, it's actually staggering, to see that it was a completely a developing country, very poor one, but the literacy rate was already in 1917 it was 95%, which is unbelievable in the sense. So Finns were actually able to read despite the fact that the primary school became compulsory only in the 1920s. So there was I would not say it would be a completely solid system or a complete functionable system, but there was a schooling system already in place which enabled, I would say, vast majority to be able to read. Then when we are looking at the rate of how much people could write at the time, it was only 42.8% in 1917. I think the quite exact rate, I would say. 43% of the population could read but not write. But thanks to the elementary school, the writing also improved rapidly, and you know, this is debatable. But the last illiterate, to my knowledge, died in the 1950s, which is rather staggering as well. But I think the literacy enabled the nation to develop rapidly. So it was really the foundation, along with the rule of law, and I think the bases of the basic structures of the rule of law actually were inherited, you know, from the Swedish kingdom from the 18th century, we were celebrating the 250th anniversary of this law adopted in Swedish kingdom, which enabled to a very sort of like, you know, transparent way of operational transparency what comes to the documents and official documents and so forth. It was really wild, actually. It was so open that it was the most efficient and most compelling one, you know, in the world at the time. In the 19th century, there was a solid base, and during the autonomy period under the Russian rule, you know, these bases were the foundations were there already, and they kept on, and they were then during the Finnish independence they were developed as well. So I think, you know, this, along with the fact that nowadays the press freedom issue is brought up in the limelight much more than it used to be brought in 10 years ago, for instance, a decade ago, I think this is a very positive thing. It is a very positive thing that we all are here today and discuss about these things, because very often in a quite well-organized society such as Finland, people, you know, things are being taken for granted very easily. And I think the press freedom issue was one which was increasingly taken for granted until, I would say, 2008, 9, 10. Very few, even journalists in Finland, knew that Finland was topping the RSF Press Freedom Index at the time. So it's actually very recent that we all know that we are pretty good in that we are part of we are actually the land of the free press, and I think, you know, all the campaigning and officials and some of the politicians as well who have been come along in order to really address it this loud and clear, that has been very good. It wasn't like that in the early 2000s, for instance. What comes to the literacy part, it's also important. So if you had your eyebrows going up, you know, when I said like 95%, you know, then, you know, it's only a sign that we should probably talk more about it and be more loud about it too. Because then if we are also aware of the fact that what we can lose. And I think there is a very strong appreciation in Finland, you know, to talk about the literacy part and understanding that it's an antidote against the hybrid threats and information warfare. But then when you go into the very action part and very so like everyday stuff, then I think, you know, people are becoming a little bit more vulnerable and more sort of like, you know, not so podium oriented. So most of the literacy stuff is being brought up from the podium, like I'm doing here now. Rather, the most of the operational structure should be taken into the schools, but also into the very everyday life of the families, and understanding the role, not only the teachers, but then, you know, the parents, how they should deal with this thing, and then also the grandparents and other siblings and family members. And I think we are not there yet. We are discussing about it increasingly, but I think there is a lot more to do. But I was very happy actually to visit the book fair That was the last day on Sunday, and very happy to see how much there were families and small kids and so forth, and then discussing with Ronja Salmi, who is the head of the book fair institution. She said that there was a lot more of younger population and young people, families and so forth than used to be. So the increase was almost 20% or so. So that's a very good sign. So that's pretty much where we are coming from. But I would say in the first that we should be more loud about it, to be able to understand what we can lose. We have the magnificent Oodi Central Library just opened in the heart of Helsinki, and at the same time the reading of children and adolescents has gone down in the light of statistics. And a year ago I talked with Hannu Salmi and Helena Tuneberg, who are researchers, and they've done a great deal in order to draw attention in the everyday situation surrounding this issue. And they were actually wondering, and they still wonder, whether the decline in literacy scores in PISA and the decline in Donald Duck's reading circulation over the past 15 years, how much do they correlate? And even if that would sound a little bit funny, but then when you think about that reading habit, that how many have you had like Donald Duck coming in your home? Yeah, everybody. Okay, here you are. So there is, it would be actually a news if there wouldn't be any correlation. So that's what Hannu and Helena they've been really doing, and they've been going in and scrutinizing this case, and they say that this may be a very interesting indicator. And it's not just about reading at school or learning to read there. It seems that the reading sources have generally declined. So really the sources also are declining, which is actually worrisome effect as well. Of course, like the PISA literary scores, they are determined by both mechanical literacy and reading comprehension factors. We know that when mechanical literacy begins to decline, it directly affects understanding of what is being read. So it's really fundamental. My question is that are we actually in the middle of a historic societal test, even though we are not really understanding on everyday basis? The thing is that we can see, for instance, from HS Helsingin Sanomat digital reading statistics, that there are a great deal of younger people who are reading good chunk of factual-based news and longer stories and so forth. We can see that we are not actually in Finland facing a huge current problem in reading. We can also see that a younger population, people in their 25 to 40. I would like to say 45 because I'm 45, but when talking about the younger, until 40, they are also willing to pay for factual-based good chunk of information. And so I think, there's no sort of like, a huge alarming sign there. But when we are talking about historical societal test, are we actually now having young people, especially boys in the primary school, that are really the first population cohort that have actually we have never seen before, because they're having a handheld device from the very beginning of the very first school day, and then concentrating in playing with the mobile phone. And then when we are kind of conquering, in the very traditional and legacy media of people's time, if we are then putting this worrisome effect into the framework of a young primary school kid, is there time left anymore after these fantastically immersive games to any reading whatsoever? And if at home the family members and the parents they might be reading good journalism from their handheld device, but the kids only see their parents using the handheld device. Is there any sort of like distinction between people doing anything else rather than like looking at the mobile? And I'm not saying that the print should be, I mean, the printed version of a newspaper would be the answer to that. No, not at all. But I'm just curious about, like, you know, what is happening now in the living rooms and in the kitchens and in the kids' rooms, you know, currently in Finland, to be able to predict what will be happen within 15 years. Because the digital disruption elements and effects, they are visible. It's always like that. But the human aspect of understanding the digital disruption is always having the same effect. And I can feel it. I've been into that so many times myself, and going in a wrong direction because of this. We always tend to sort of like over-exaggerate the implications when new technology is being adopted. What we are then missing out are the long-term prospects and long-term effects of the disruption. And of course, this is about like the traditional media. We could see that disruption was coming, that we were over-exaggerating it 20 years ago. We really underestimated the real effects, what were coming in, you know, less than 10 years ago. And we were late. And so my question is that is this societal test going to end up in something that we are thinking 15 years after this meeting here, that have we been able to predict and understand what has been going on if we have a cohort, a new cohorts, not really able to read? And I think, you know, your example of what is the European overall contest, that one of 6 that was kids or youngsters.
It was
adults. Adults are not able. So if you think that if we would have a new kind of a threat coming out, you know, what would that figure then look like in the end of the day? So I'm just like, you know, I wouldn't, you know, like to sound like alarmistic, or because there's a lot of optimism in the air right now. We can see that, like, you know, the HS is doing well what comes to the subscription. Yeah. The newspaper is turning 130 years and we're happy and so forth. And we can see that the masses of young people are reading good journalism. And I think, you know, Jouko from the YLE, you know, you might say the same. What you can see from the statistics from and the digital numbers from your perspective as well. But you know, this is worrisome. So I think, you know, the scientists, teachers, officials, literary experts have been very loud actually about the potential future problems. And what I see really vital is listening to the Finnish language teachers associations, the Finnish language teachers associations. A couple of years ago, they just, like, you know, put all these bits and pieces together, and they were warning that less reading will diversify the society. That's, you know, I would say that's logical. Less reading diminishes the media literacy, logical. And it diminishes the ability to be critical towards different sources. That's why we're here today. And it also weakens one's abilities of social interactions. So more reading also means better, you know, social interaction capabilities, because we probably understand more of what you are thinking while we are having more inputs from different sources. But they also say, and this is now the positive side, that active reading, however, increases one's common knowledge, and it develops thinking and concentration. And I think what's really, you know, bugging me, and I think all the parents and, you know, people, that are these big media platforms and intermediaries, are they actually stealing our ability to concentrate on things? Because I can feel it myself. I've been robbed my capability of concentrate on some, like, real issues for a long time, because I'm being interrupted all the time. And I love to be interrupted. And this is the thing, with the platforms. The problem is that we are so much into those platforms that we cannot even see. We always see the problem of somebody else, kid or somebody else's, problem. But we really have hard time to understand what is happening inside of our own heads, because there's a lot of things happening, and we are not able to steer that. So when talking about kids, the bigger problem might be us. What is actually happening to us? Are we actually the first cohort that is getting really into the problematic zone and not being able to understand what is happening? There was a mention here at the panel that we should also take care of the older generation. And I think, if there would be now the alarm bell ringing, I would be rather really worried of my mother's population, because they are very digitally illiterate. They can be guided towards wherever, of course my answer to my mother is just you need to read Helsingin Sanomat, and that's it, it's just going to, or watch the YLE or reading it, from the digital platform. Well, okay, anyhow. But I think the Finnish Language Teachers Association is very right. Then there is the other way, that do we get too pessimistic, too alarmistic? I think it is very vital to fight back the lying press, Lügenpresse, in any possible means, and I think the active ways, there has been good examples of fighting against these crooks, against with the judicial system, but also then look, ourselves as well, focused on how to do future-proof journalism, and then when reading the material and researches of this particular issue, there's definitely a sort of self-mirroring issue with the legacy media, and I think the traditional way of putting it is that, we at the legacy media, we have to be very transparent. We have to start to know and understand how to be more transparent and so forth. I think we have been repeating that stuff, for years, and I don't know, where we are. I can't see much development, and I can be very self-critical on that as well. I think the transparency issue is very important. It also consists the product design. Because the product design means that we can see that in the old world, when we were watching the 8:30 news, or in the linear television, or you read the newspaper as such, you could actually understand where the articles are and how they are being placed, vis-a-vis each other. And nowadays, in the digital field, that's very, very different. And so you have a stream of articles that are not placed in any a coherent way, and I think there's a lot of room to do. I think we are in the Stone Age now, what comes to the really understanding how to put things and bits and pieces together in understandable way. So the product design is one thing, to be able to tell inside an article, for instance, what this article is all about. Is this a news article? What kind of articles is this a column or op-ed or so forth? Those are no-brainers. But how much we have been doing it until now, very little. Very important. Then there is also the storytelling part. That to be able to entice these younger cohorts and small kids, to be able to digest, what we do have and offer. I think this is a very, very important thing, on the whole, that we need to do good journalism, but to be able to develop the storytelling capabilities much, much, much faster than we have been able to do until now. Because if there is no enticement, there will be no reading. And for instance, Hannu Salmi told me that it's not really only the news, and it's not only the traditional media, but you have to understand, Kaius, that when a boy or girl is playing Minecraft. There's a fantastic repertoire of books about Minecraft, you know, in libraries and bookstores and so forth. And these kids, you know, they are very, very, very willing to read these books, and they can be really, you know, hardcore, good quality books as well. And so actually, you get into the area of enticement. How do you have content, and how do you actually deliver the content in the way that the younger population are willing to read, and not really thinking that you would need to do that. Okay, so the source criticism, very important, and I think, you know, school has got a very important role in that. We have also differences. I think one thing which is systematic difference between Sweden and Finland, and this is just an example, it's a small example, and it's not kind of a qualitative example as such, you know, but I'm just telling that there's you know, in Nordic countries we have very sort of like, you know, common way of understanding these things, but there is, for instance, a system type of difference between Sweden, that in Sweden, if you look at the rates, how much people are voting and young people are voting in the European elections, that's much higher than in Finland. And there might be several reasons for that, but one of the main solid reasons is that the school system adopts, you know, the European Union and the power base of the European Union inside their curriculum. It is inside the schooling system and so forth. And it does not mean that you would be in favor of the European Union, but rather that it's a contextual framework of understanding that there is at least, you know, some sort of like element we call EU, to be able to understand what these guys are doing there and how much it affects our life and so forth. And I think, you know, this is only a very small example that what we are actually lagging, what we are lacking, and what would be, you know, the next stage of development inside the schooling system to be able to sort of like, you know, get people and get the kids inside the societal role, not because of the society, but because themselves, they are needed to build the society themselves. They need to be part of the society. And then we can include also the source criticism inside this curriculum. We can include, you know, the need for quality press inside the curriculum and so forth. And I think this is, you know, well, this might get too far away, but I think, you know, this is a national security issue. This is something which is very, very important, and much more important because we are then, in the end of the day, as the panelists said, we are talking about the resilience and the capability of sustaining the democracy, and that's a big thing. I think in the Nordic countries we have some commonalities as well when it comes to the traditional media. That all the bigger news outlets do have a sort of like gravitational strategy. We call it destination strategy. It means that we are not letting the platforms dictate how much there is traffic, digital traffic coming into our sites. It's a bold statement now. It's, of course, the everyday life is not that bold. But I would say that the strategy has been there for 15 years. It has been a clear-cut and well-understood strategy. It's not there for hazard. It's because that if the platforms, if we would be completely platform junkies, that we were just expect the platforms to deliver most of the digital traffic, then we would end up in a situation as in many European, Southern European countries, for instance, are that there's like that really the top sites inside the countries are the platforms and then non-journalistic sites. And this this strategy actually, the destination strategy correlates with the trust of press and other trust factors and numbers as well. And I think that's very very important. We're not letting the intermediaries, you know, to be the first-hand destinations, because they are already. I mean, of course they are destinations, but to be able to be sort of like, you know, balancing that stuff. If I look at it from the HS perspective, because I don't know the HS numbers, we are having a lot of traffic from the Facebook, from the Google, from the Twitter, and so forth. But if that would be cut out, you know, within 1 second, we would be definitely sustainable. We would not be sort of like, you know, in a position that everything would collapse. And so that's what I call future-proof. Okay. I would say that the kids that are now being born, they will leave to the next century. So actually we are talking that what kind of a society we want to have already in 2118, 19, 20. And so I think really, you know, which is interesting while looking at the newspaper that is turning this week 130 years old, we can see that it's really, really close, you know, the chain of the different generations of journalists and different generations of readers. It's a chain, and it's really easy to catch up. You know, did you know that Helsingin Sanomat growth actually happened to be time-wise, it really goes into 1914, 15, 16, because of the First World War. You know, there was people in Finland who were so anxious to know what is happening all around Europe, even though the First World War did not affect Finland so much, that you know the readership of Helsingin Sanomat then broke and increased really rapidly. So these elements are very close and they are very logical and so forth. So when we are now discussing about these issues here, I would say that we are actually making decisions to the next century, which is very close as well, even though it might sound that it's far away. So let's make history together. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaius. We're running 5 minutes late, so let's come back at 5 minutes past 3 and continue the seminar. 15 minutes break. journalism during the post-truth era. And this discussion is hosted by Maria Pettersson, the editor-in-chief of Journalisti magazine, which is the magazine of the Journalist Union here in Finland. And the two discussion participants or panelists are Olli Seuri, who is a journalist at YLE and a professor of practice in journalism at the Tampere University, and Ricardo Gutierrez, who is the General Secretary of the European Federation of Journalists, EFJ. I'll let you continue.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Should we take photo? Yes. Thank you very much, Johanna. Thank you, gentlemen. Welcome, and welcome also people who are watching the stream. Welcome back. So today we are discussing some dramatic words: crisis, trust. These are big things. How to reinforce trust in journalism. I think my first question would be, are we indeed facing a crisis in trust when it comes to journalism? Is the relationship between journalism and the public somehow broken? Ricardo.
Yes. I'm not happy to tell, but yes. And we have very precise figures about this global trend, because it's a global, worldwide trend. It's not just European or Ukrainian, it's global. It has been mentioned, it was one of the focal points of the last edition of the digital news report from Reuters Institute, published in June, I think, a few months ago. And I think it's important to point out some of the outcomes. I'll be very short, but just to tell you how is the situation. So this is based on 75,000 online news consumers in 38 countries on 6 continents. So it's a worldwide survey. And what are the main outcomes? Only 49% of the sample in the digital news report trust the news they use, so their own news. The average level of trust in the news in general is only points to 42%, so less, which is normal. And social media, the news found on social media remain very low trusted, with only 23%. So, as you can see, the level is low, and it's still diminishing, so it's still on a negative trend. So we have a problem, indeed.
I'm glad you brought up the numbers. I'll try to highlight the different kind of point of view, and I'm sorry if I lecture a little bit for the first part, because I'm at the university now. I kind of think this is there's a change in trust. Rachel Botsman has written about redistribution of trust. She talks about the hierarchical trust, the trust of the old world, and trust of the institutions, the trust of the times that we had few general media, even to consume, has changed to distributed trust, to the trust of the networks and trust of the platforms and trust of the peers. And this is very important to understand, that when we are talking about these numbers, we also try to understand why is this happening. And I think this redistribution of trust is really important, as sometimes we tend to think that actually there's some kind of post-trust era, or we are entering a time that people don't trust anymore. The amount of trust isn't really changing, but the way trust is being distributed is changing. People don't trust the old institutions as much. They might not trust our newspapers or our broadcast media as much as they did, but they do trust, for example, bloggers or YouTubers or podcasters that are not media professionals in a sense that the journalistic professionals are. So I think this redistribution of trust is very important, and it's happening also outside media field. Like you can see it happening in financial markets. You can see a business like Airbnb and Uber and so on. So we need to understand that the world has changed in a way that we might have to, reconsider the way we think of trust also.
Thank you. Very interesting. Not lecturing at all. Now, Ricardo, you mentioned the digital news report surveys, and since 2015, trust towards news has been higher among Finns than any other citizens of any other participating country. And you just heard the overall figures, but in Finland, a total of 59% said that they can trust most of the news, and 70% of people said that they trust the news that they follow themselves, so they decide to follow on their own. Is this a good number? 59% and 70%?
Well, I would say that in comparison with other states, it's not so bad. And it's not only a Nordic trend. Portugal has a high level of, shows a high level of trust in news media. On the opposite side, you have France, a strong decline, and it's related with the coverage of the yellow vest by the media. So we know that there is a relationship between the quality, I would say, of the work of journalists, so the coverage, and the mistrust from the population. Very low levels in Hungary. So I think the mistrust is also related with the global environment, the lack of media pluralism in a country, and that's the case in some other countries as well. Like Greece, for example, with a total dismantle of the public broadcaster a few years ago, and difficulties to restore a news, I would say a fair and honest news global framework. The level of mistrust, and it's showed as well by the digital news report, is directly related with the fear of disinformation. The more you fear, the more you are concerned, the population is concerned with disinformation, the more you will mistrust. You will show a lack of trust with the media. And the contrary, the opposite is also right. So now I would like to come back to what you said. Showing. I think we should be really concerned about the mistrust on the media. I would like to read you a quote from a short quote from a prominent philosopher who used to be a journalist as well, Hannah Arendt. It's an extract from an interview she gave in 1974 to a French journalist, and she was commenting on what we called at that time propaganda. Fake news or disinformation was not used as a concept at that time, and that's what she said. The moment we no longer have a free press, anything can happen. What makes it possible for a totalitarian or any other dictatorship to rule is that people are not informed. How can you have an opinion if you are not informed? And that's the important part. If everybody always lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. Nobody believes anything any longer. That's exactly the mechanism of disinformation. The point is not to share some fake news. The point is to create a global mistrust. And this is that type of climate feeding dictatorship, feeding totalitarianism. So that's why I'm very concerned about disinformation. I think we should not be soft. And coming back to the discussion of the first panel, I would say that from my point of view, the EU is not doing enough, to tackle disinformation. Of course, it's important to protect freedom of expression, and we need to set up measures preserving freedom of expression. But there are plenty of things to do. For example, on the fact that we know that disinformation is money-driven. We know that some oligarchs are paying Facebook to share this information,
Yes,
and we asked the Commission to act on this, and they just refuse to do so.
Yes, and we'll get back to what should be done a bit later. But then now I'd like to ask Olli, so 60%, 70%, what is a good amount of, or a good number if we think like the press uses power, right? And you shouldn't trust anyone who uses power 100%, right? You shouldn't trust your police, you shouldn't trust your politicians, and you shouldn't trust your press 100%. That means that you have no doubts, you think that they are always right. And if they're not right, they will correct their mistakes. So 100% isn't healthy either. So what's a good level of trust in press, in news? What do you think, Olli?
Yeah, like a healthy ceiling of trust. I have to say that we are at least closer to the ceiling than many countries, so I'm pretty pleased with the figures. And we need to understand that the trust has never been 100%. It's probably been something like 80% or 80-some% in the days that we had 2 TV channels and 3 radio channels and 1 regional or city newspaper that people consumed. So now everybody can access pretty much everything, every content everywhere. They can reach out to different kind of platforms for information, and still the trust is about 60% in Finland. So if you compare these 2 worlds to each other, I would say that there's probably no possibility of us gaining more than 80% trust. I would be happy to be wrong if our general media would gain better trust in the future, but I would say that we shouldn't look at the trust numbers from those days, but think about what trust actually means in these days. And I think one important thing that also Kaius brought up is that compared to many countries, Finland has, I'm not sure if it's the highest number, one of the highest numbers of users who actually do see news via news media apps and news media sites. There's only about 30% of people consuming them via or getting from Facebook and other social media. So that means that people actually trust them. They have these apps on their phones. They have these bookmarks on their web browsers. And this is a good situation. At the same time, it's like, what would be the reasons for trust to be in decline? I can see that I would go the same path as you were telling, that the information environment is really hard for news media at the moment. So keeping that trust will get harder all the time.
Do you feel that the public conversation around journalism has become more toxic? And if yes, since when? And perhaps why?
More toxic against journalists, you mean? Or I believe that some politicians decided maybe 5 years ago, thinking about Mr. Trump in the US and some others, to blame the media, just to protect themselves. Because I think that blaming the media, and that's why, sorry Joanna, but I tried not to use the term fake news. I don't want to, to eradicate that term, but that's the term used by those politicians, not to blame the real disinformation providers, not to blame the Russian trolls or the bots, but to blame journalists, professional journalists. So I don't want to use that term, but some politicians are using it widely and strongly. And some liberal politicians in France, Mr. Macron and some others. So it's not just some populist leaders nowadays. And I think that the real reason for this is that it's a way to weaken the press, to weaken journalists as counterpowers. That's what we are supposed to do. And of course, those in power, they just want to weaken the counterpowers we are supposed to do.
Olli, do you agree that this comes from the politicians, the possible...
It started with the politicians.
With the toxic conversation?
I would say it started with the platforms.
Both.
and the use of platforms. And so it's wider than the politicians, but politicians are definitely using it. I would say that I can see at least a couple of strategies that might be a little bit different from each other. The populists are certainly kind of taking punches upwards and downwards, which means that they're taking punches on elite and minorities, and that means that in this strategy, media is seen as an elite, and media is made to be a party or even a partisan actor, which limits the power or limits the ability of media to actually do what we are supposed to do. And the other strategy I was thinking, after you mentioned Hannah Arendt and that quote, there's a really good book that has come out this year from Peter Pomerantsev, which is This Is Not Propaganda. And he's saying that the powers that used to rely or try to limit information through censorship or other means are actually have realized that as you cannot limit the information nowadays, what you do, you try to distort the information space. So also in this kind of, when this kind of strategy is being used, it kind of limits the way journalists can do their job. I would say there's like, when social media is involved, when identities are involved, when there's like culture war kind of layout, journalist space is really getting narrow.
So obviously just wishing that things were different will not change much or anything. Now, if the relationship between journalism and the people it aims to serve is indeed broken, then should we, the journalists, take responsibility for that? And if not us, then who?
I think we do. I think we need to be more humble. We need to be more, it was mentioned in the first panel as well, to be more transparent. And I think some journalists are doing the job, that way. If you look at the excellent work from ICIJ, the International Consortium for Investigative Journalism, on the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and so on, there is a kind of, they are not just reporting about the facts, they are also explaining how they've been worked. Of course, they didn't disclose their sources, which is something we should protect as a journalist. But there was a kind of making of it's our duty as well to explain to citizens how we work, in which honest way we work, to show that we are doing this in the public interest, not just for the media owners or for the funding of the company, but also because we believe in public interest. So, yes, I definitely believe we need a change of attitude from journalists.
Yeah, definitely we need to be responsible for trying to show people the worth of journalism in the society. We are the ones that have to be able to differentiate ourselves from others, because there's so many content providers or content producers in the world today. Like, I do hate saying everything is content, but in a way it's true. So if we have content that's more valuable than other content, how do you differentiate from others, and how do you show people that there is value? I think the other institution which is in trouble, but not as big trouble as we are, is science. And I think science and journalism should be differentiating through telling people that we are actually truthful narratives. But that would mean that our work would have to be truthful also. Like, we couldn't make so many mistakes, so we couldn't go through some of the mistakes that we do all the time that people might not feel as legitimate journalism. Like, in the name of journalism, we do a lot of things. So we should think which of those things are healthy and valuable, and after that, we would have to show people that this is what we do, and this is why you should pay for work we do.
So what are those kinds of journalism that are valuable, and are there kinds of journalism that are not, which should which just sort of don't help us to regain the trust, but the other way around.
Throughout history, there's been different kind of discussions on infotainment and yellow media papers and becoming too much entertainment, and that's kind of missing the point. It's like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have entertaining news or entertaining ways of doing journalism. The thing is that we should look at what are the elements, not just the elements that people are willing to click on, but the elements of journalism that are important to society and to the people who are reading the papers, and which are the elements where journalism is needed. Because not everything that we publish is kind of a content that no one else could do. For us, it's more important to be the kind of actor that I think that people trust us mostly because they think of us as a kind of a fourth estate, or kind of a people who are looking at the checks and the balances. And that's the kind of journalism that we need to keep in the core of what we do, in the core even on what we do online.
Yeah. I believe we are rather good on keeping people up to date, but we are not good enough on helping them to understand the news, to understand what's going on. So I think we need deeper journalism. Real journalism is just, and I have some concerns about the concept of investigative journalism. I believe that every single journalist should be an investigative journalist. Even at the local level, there is no difference. I think if you are a real journalist, you should, have skills on investigation. And the new element, maybe the new dimension, is a kind of educational dimension or skill. We need to be more, to help citizens understand the world around. And that's not usual for journalists. I was discussing the issue with a French journalist a few days ago in Strasbourg during the World Forum for Democracy. Fabrice Arfi from Mediapart, which is a really good online media in France. And he told me that, I think the image is rather interesting, that journalists should consider themselves today as teachers of the everyday life. Teachers, not professors, teachers, which is, I think, a rather good image.
And if I want to be more concrete to your last question, is that we should think, like, for example, the way we cover different kind of clashes in social media at the moment, very, very hot topic in Finland, like even this week or last week. What we are doing, we are just amplifying. We're just feeding the discussion. We're taking a discussion from somewhere. We're saying that he says this, she says this, and it just. I'm not sure if that's what the people who want to pay for media are expecting from media.
Thank you. Now, the best brains in journalism are at this moment are wondering if it's possible to gain back trust, and if yes, how. Now, I'm glad that I have the top two brains here, and now you could perhaps answer this question and solve this for all of us. So, how to gain back trust?
Well, you have high expectation about the brains. From my experience, I strongly believe that quality journalism, ethical journalism, professional journalism is the best antidote to disinformation. So we need to invest. And by the way, as a federation, so we are representing the interest of the profession, we just launched two new EU projects. I will just mention the name of these projects. The first one is called Trust and Quality in Journalism. So that's something we
like
launched. And the second one is Media Councils in the Digital Age. Because I also believe that self-regulation, efficient self-regulation, visible self-regulation, is also a way, to regain trust.
Yeah, I definitely cannot give a silver bullet to this question. I think we should more think about it as some kind of change, ongoing change that is treatable but not solvable. Like there's no one way or few ways that we can regain trust. And I would look at the larger societal changes and being analytical about those, because only way to be positive or optimistic is understanding the change. And I see some dark clouds when I look at the political polarization, or if the social media platforms keep engaging us the way they are doing. Individualization, globalization, fragmentation, and all these megatrends. I don't see that there would be much to be won for general media, the kind of media that wants to address the whole nation or the whole populace. The thing is, there will be definitely trusted media in the future, but can we keep high trust in this general media and this non-partisan media, or are we going to go in a way that some societies are definitely going, that the better strategy to survive is actually to cater to certain pacts of the audience? And that's actually, for my kind of journalist, my self-understanding of the work I do, that's not very optimistic view of the future.
Do we have time for questions?
Can take one.
Okay. We have time for one question. One. There is no question. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Maria, Ricardo, and Olli. I would like to ask the next panelists to join me here. And they are Sergei Tomilenko from Ukraine, Sengiuma Gazirigwa-Mita from Tanzania, and Hanne Aho from Finland, and Gulnara Agudova from Denmark. You guys can talk to each other for a couple of minutes, because we're going to have to change the microphones to these panelists, so that people listening to the stream can also hear. So just talk to your neighbor, get to know them. Joo, pitää vähän vaihdella. Ne ei kuulu yleisölle, ne menee sinne striimiin.
Tämä nyt tähän sitten, mikä sulla on täällä?
Joo, itse asiassa. Joo, tehdään niin.
Ja jos sinä tässä nyt puhut jonkun esittelyn, niin oot tässä lähellä, niin mä saan tästä napista sitten sen jollain tavalla estää striimiin. Yes.
I think we have a mutual microphone, so we can use this.
Yeah.
Strange sounds.
So we also have to use this one.
I think we do. Yeah, because this.
Right, Johanna.
Yeah.
We have this mic because the audience won't hear you.
Right.
People on the stream.
Oh yeah, I remember.
All right, we are ready to continue. The topic of the day's last panel discussion is endangered democracy, the rise of populism and the consequences for free press in Europe and in Africa. So, as you can see from the title of the panel, this is going to be a very broad and sweeping tour of the horizon on extremely large topics and a very, very big geographical area of the world. So I don't think we'll be getting too deeply into these areas and these topics, but we have a panel of experts here. And as I said in the introduction, we have representation from multiple countries here as well. Gulnara is actually from Azerbaijan, but she lives in Denmark. and she is an expert on various countries in the topic of the rise of populism and dangers to democracy. And then we have Tanzania, we have Ukraine, and we have Finland. So you might think, so what's common to all these countries? But we'll probably get to that. We'll find some common ground. I would like to ask you to introduce yourselves in terms of like what you do for work, because I'm sure most of the audience doesn't know. So I'd like to maybe start with you, Governor.
Sure. Thank you very much, Johanna. Good afternoon, everyone. I am from International Media Support in Copenhagen, Denmark. We are a global non-profit organization working across 4 continents to support good journalism and promote freedom of expression. I'm very delighted to be here and look forward to our interesting debate.
I'm Hanne Aho, working as a president of the Journalists in Finland, and of course working for our members, right? Quite widely working with different kind of things, and right now we are just having collective agreements with our Yleisradio company, so public broadcasting radio company. Lots of different kinds of work.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Serhiy from Ukraine. I am president of National Union of Journalists of Ukraine, and my union is the biggest journalist organization or NGO in my country. And the main problem or threat for journalists in Ukraine is, to my mind, system impunity or high level of physical aggression against journalists, because our monitoring fixes more than 80 cases of physical aggression against journalists each year. So I think that safety of journalists is our biggest priority. But we support many important discussions about standards, about disinformation, about propaganda, about media regulation and press freedom too. Okay.
My name is Sengiyumva Gasirego Mwita. They're very long, just like how far I come. I'm very far. I'm coming from very far. I work for the Media Institute of Southern Africa, Tanzania chapter. Media Institute of Southern Africa is a freedom of expression organization that works in 11 SADC member countries. SADC is Southern African Development Community, and we have chapters. We were headquartered in Windhoek, Namibia. Now we are moving to Lusaka, Zambia. Our basic function is to promote freedom of expression, and both online and offline. And below that, we are working towards promoting press freedom as well as access to information.
I would like to start with you and the situation in Tanzania. I don't know how many people of you are familiar with this, but if you look at the World Press Freedom Index from this year, 2019, Tanzania has dropped 25 points in the ranking. So whereas it used to be number 93 in the world in press freedom, it now ranks at 118. And I'll just read to you some of what it says in the description. With the adoption of draconian legislation, the closure of media outlets and the expulsion of press freedom defenders, Tanzania has suffered an unprecedented decline in press freedom. Nicknamed the bulldozer, John Magufuli has tolerated no criticism of himself or his policies since becoming president in 2015. How do you see this situation in Tanzania? This is like, as it says here, an unprecedented drop in the ranking. So what is the situation in the field like?
I think it's quite different. You know, I've practiced journalism for 9 years before I went into advocacy, and we are working, with journalists from across the country. And I think, yes, that's the report, but I think most of the stories, they are hyped. They're very much hyped. Because if you see the situation in the country, it's not the way it is, described by Western media and especially social media. Yes, yes, there are laws, the new laws that have been, passed between, 2015 and, 2016, and yes, there are challenges within those very laws, provisions that, are not good, but there are also provisions that are very good that, they are, for example, it's for the first time now we are recognizing journalism as a profession in the country. This is something that we did not recognize in the past. Yes, there are people who, have been, detained here and there as a result of, the implementation of these laws. But we cannot conclusively say that the situation is very bad as it is portrayed. Because, for example, this year, we have no journalist who is in jail up to this moment. Even human rights defenders, there is no one in jail. Yes, they have been detained, but released, but as in jail, no. No one has ever been killed, since 2012. 2012, that was when a journalist was killed by the police. But ever since, no one has ever been killed up to this moment. There have been cases where some have disappeared because we cannot conclusively say that they are dead or what, because they disappeared. And the only people who can say, probably, who can say where they are or what, is the government, and it hasn't, said where these people are. Those who have been detained, yes, I'm sure you have cases like that of Eric Kabendera. Yes, he was detained. Some allegations, but we can, those of us in the media, we cannot conclusively say why he was detained. I think he only and the state, they are the ones who can really tell us why, he was detained. But given the statistics, previously, all these harassments, there were so many, but compared to the time being, I think things are improving. This year, yes, there have been a couple of also suspension of newspapers, but for some time, but no paper has been banned, for example, this year. Absolutely. No paper. So, and the number, is increasing. Right now, for example, we have like 230 publications that have been re-registered under the new law. We have, for example, more than 120 radio stations that are operating around, 40-something TV stations that are operational. There is a law that was introduced, an online content regulation in 2018 that required also the platforms, online platforms, to be registered. I think it's because of the rise of disinformation, etc., etc. That's when authorities decided to come in and see whether they can be registered. And according to the report by the Tanzania Communication Regulatory Authority, by October 2018, like 210 online platforms. I'm talking about online televisions, online radio, and platforms like Jamii Forum, if some of you know about it, have been registered, and even and bloggers as well have been registered. There are challenges with regards to the registration of the bloggers, but for some of us, we think that it's a good move, because at least you are trying to to curb the rising level of disinformation, which I also see that is a big thing here. For us, we thought it was only in that part of the world, but I see the same thing here. Since morning, people, since afternoon, they are talking about, disinformation in the European Union. Yeah.
However, there have been closures of media outlets, and there have been, arrests of journalists, and you talked about this disappearance as well. So it doesn't sound so rosy. Are media outlets actually able to criticize the president and his actions?
Now, is that the only thing that we need to do as media? Just criticize the president? No. There are those who can criticize, and he has said, even the minister in charge of information has clearly stated that you are not prohibited from criticizing. But how do you criticize? That is what makes the difference. But criticism, constructive criticism, that one is allowed. Because otherwise, of the 230, newspapers, you would find like 50 or 70, you're banned, you'll find a good number of journalists in jail, etc., etc. Yes, I cannot deny that there are those cases that have been here and there, but compared to the number of media outlets that are operating, you cannot conclusively say that the situation is that worse.
We could, of course, continue talking about this forever, but we only have so much time, so I want to move on to Ukraine. And speaking of presidents, the new president of Ukraine has been, of course, in the news in Finland also quite a lot, because he used to be a TV star and an actor. So this is an interesting situation. Are the media allowed to criticize him?
I think that now Ukraine is at the epicenter of growing populism in Europe, and our president, Zelensky, who was an actor or comedian, is an example of a populist leader, and he tries to use some media technologies, and he demonstrates that he ignores the traditional media and journalists. But now I think that maybe we see a big problem for journalists for future. Now starts, and I think that Zelensky, as a populist politician, he thinks that he has a direct channel of contact with an audience that bypasses media. And he demonstrates that media now have lost the monopoly to deliver news to the audience. And for example, President Zelensky now twice gave interviews to his car Tesla, without journalists, without media, but just he recorded the video in Tesla and spread through social networks, through YouTube, and he was happy. And once he gave interview to a hired actor who acted as a journalist. He gave we demanded special press conference on his 100 days as president, but he reacted by this big, more than 1 hour interview. But Ukrainians, we saw at this interview our current president who acted as president in comedy, and we saw journalist who acted as prime minister in this comedy in the past. So it was a joke for traditional media, but it was good production for citizens, maybe, because everybody discussed about this big interview actor to actor. And the third case was when after our campaign, when we criticized him that he didn't give any press conference or any press events for traditional media. So he organized his first press conference as president as memorable event. It took place at a new food hall in central Kyiv and lasted for more than 12 hours. Changed journalists every half of hour, and President spoke with more than 300 Ukrainian and foreign journalists during the press marathon, and now he presents it as the longest press conference ever held by any sitting president. So we see this as joke, but first stage was very fun, but second stage now is very dangerous because his team, presidential team, threatens media workers imprisonment for alleged manipulation, and audits and penalties for media channels if they are not profitable. So Ukrainian government now wants to bring criminal responsibility for spreading fakes and manipulating public consciousness very quickly. A draft of such a bill is due in Parliament by the end of this year. Now we are organizing some campaign against anti-fake, against quickly anti-fake bill in Ukraine, and debating with his team. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I want to also quote from the World Press Freedom Index one sentence it says about Ukraine, which has something to do with Finland. It says that the separatist-controlled areas in the east are still no-go areas without critical journalists or foreign observers. And this has a connection to Finland because a Finnish man called Janos Putkonen, who moved from Finland first to Donetsk and then to Luhansk, and he was heading the Doni News propaganda outlet from there, and now he is running from Luhansk, Finland's most notorious so-called fake news website called Amberlehti. And he was also working as like a press officer over there in those areas, and he was banning Finnish reporters from accessing Donetsk. And this is like an interesting situation where a Finnish person is doing this sort of propaganda. Have you heard of this person?
Yes, I heard the problem or conflict, or in fact Ukraine is a victim of Russian aggression and victim of this hybrid actions against Ukraine. We think that Ukraine is the first training zone for Russia for this dirty tricks with this disordering of democracy involved. But I think that problem with occupied territory is quite different with Ukraine or territory which are controlled by Ukrainian government. So now we demand press freedom from our government, and we demonstrate some solidarity with journalists who are imprisoned by Russia or by separatists in Donetsk, and our priority is that Stanislav Aseyev, who more than 2 years now imprisoned in occupied Donetsk, should be free.
Thank you. Moving on to Finland then. Hanne, is freedom of the press threatened in Finland also? Because we are most often seen as one of the top countries in the world, but do we have a problem with this also? How do you see that as the chair of the Journalist Union?
When I listen to my colleagues, of course we are quite far from imprisoning the journalists, but I think one big basic thing is that we have a mutual understanding in Finland that we want to be a democracy, and we need to have a free press for that, and we need the press freedom for that. And it's been for a long time. It's been everybody would have wanted that the people and the politicians and everyone. That's the ground for our press freedom. But as we all know, we all Finns know that we have had raising voices for questioning and undermining press in Finland, and of course we have to notice that, and we have to see it, and we have to hear it. But I wouldn't say that our press freedom is under threat.
Do you see that some journalists are being silenced in Finland?
Yes. We have these hate campaigns against journalists going on, and some even years going on. And of course the main goal is to silence those journalists. And that is a big question. And hopefully most of those cases has been they come out to the public, so everybody knows about them, and that's really important. And we have also maybe other things, not just, for example, self-censorship is also a problem, because there are issues. Our journalists don't want to talk, they don't want to write, they don't want to tell, because they're afraid of this hate speech, these hate campaigns. There used to be things like wolves or abortion or even food, but these days we know they are mostly immigration questions or Russia. So we know some journalists are avoiding those questions, and that is also a thing that we really have to notice. We have to be alert for those. Yeah.
That's also something that might be quite difficult to quantify and actually show any numbers that how many people are actually being silenced or self-censoring, because that's not something that journalists actually advertise doing, and it might be even difficult to just recognize it to yourself that you're doing that.
Yeah, that's true. But we know from surveys that the number is, at this point, it's not very big. It's less than 10%, even less than 5% in some points. But anyhow, we have to be we really have to notice this problem. We have to talk about it among the journalists. So and help each other for not doing that.
Thank you. So Gunnar, how do you see all of this from a more international perspective? Are there commonalities in terms of threats to press freedom in the countries that you work with?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I really wanted to thank the organizers for bringing two speakers from outside of the EU, because we cannot live in our own bubble. And if we turn a blind eye to what's going on in countries like Tanzania, Ukraine, and other countries of the world where freedom of expression is increasingly under threat, then we might end up with problems existing in our own countries. And just one of the examples is a recent series of attacks on journalists in the heart of Europe. I am reminding of the case of Daphne Caruana Galizia, who was murdered in Malta for her investigative reporting. And there are many other examples, and media is increasingly under attack in Europe, in the very EU member states. When it comes to whether there are any common threats, yes, I've been listening with great interest and also concern to my colleagues from Ukraine and Tanzania, and we have this saying in the Russian language, Potemkin villages. It's just when you try to present something nice to cover something bad up. And in Tanzania, there has been this argument that there is an abundance of media outlets existing. But as a human rights lawyer and a researcher, I've been researching the situation in Tanzania and other countries where freedom of expression is under threat. What are the working conditions of all those media houses? To which extent they are independent? How about the level of self-censorship? What happens when these journalists are detained, when they are tried, whether there is a fair trial for them? That's one example. Then from Ukraine, we've heard about this beautiful press marathon that the president has organized. But at the same time, we know that this is the very president who attacked a female reporter when she approached him with a question. So that sort of PR they are trying to create in order to cover up violations. And we should be very mindful of the fact that these guys, they continue working against the odds in their countries, and they need support. Lots of threats. It's physical threats, psychological threats, digital threats, of course, and it's all common across 4 continents.
How about I want to continue with you a little bit more. How about election meddling that we talked about in a previous panel? How do you see that panning out from your perspective, disinformation?
Well, I think it's a very dangerous trend, and it's spreading, and we know that in many cases that would be one country's interference into affairs of another country. However, I would also like to remind that in some countries, like in some dictatorship countries or the countries with authoritarian rule, as Tanzania is, for example, the government is using disinformation and fake news to spread fear and to promote their own agenda.
So also, of course, we don't want to just sort of talk about dystopian views and bad developments here. So I would also like to ask you, what kind of solutions do you see?
Well, you and I, we had a very fascinating chat last night over a nice dinner in downtown Helsinki, and we both agree, we are both on the same page that disinformation is not something that you can fight completely, but this is something you can live with and you can manage. So the solutions would be how to manage disinformation. And I very much agree with Ricardo, who said earlier that good journalism is the best answer. So we should strive to support good journalism in countries where journalism is under threat. We should show solidarity. And we should also look at other ways rather than just supporting production of good content and distribution of good content. And we have been talking about social media platforms, internet intermediaries. We have mentioned them many times as something which is evil, but I would like to remind this audience that in many countries of the world, those social media platforms is the only possible place for independent voices to express themselves. This is the only place for civil society and peaceful protesters to organize and discuss. So from this perspective, freedom of expression on social media platforms should be protected. However, the social media platforms, they should be held into account. And how we can do that? I say we promote and demote. For example, there is International Fact-Checking Network, and they have 72 members. From Denmark, it's Checkit, Danish fact-checking platform, and from Norway, it's Faktisk. And I remember that there was like also the Mikko, you presented earlier. You used to be part of the fact-checking network, but then you
do full-time, all the time fact-checking. That's the only problem.
Yeah. But this actually allows fact-checking organizations to demote fake news, and that gives impact, because fact-checking alone by itself is not necessarily a solution, because again, we spoke about that yesterday, that it's often the very same people who check quality media, and this group also checks fact-checking website. But how about other parts of population who are so vulnerable to fake news and disinformation, and they often get it on Facebook? So if bad content is demoted, if people wouldn't see bad content in their Facebook feed, that could be somehow like an immediate solution. Also, I think the platforms, they could engage, like in countries like Ukraine. I hear that Facebook is planning to open an office and engage with the government and civil society and media organizations in Ukraine to discuss co-regulation, how they call it, what can be done, because Ukraine remains a priority country for Facebook, also because of the war with Russia. So the threat of disinformation is huge in Ukraine. So that could be part of the solution, to engage with social media companies at the national level, because at the international level it's still very difficult. Then media literacy has been mentioned as a long-term solution. And again, I was very pleased to hear that we should not only be focusing on the young people, because like older people, they are even more vulnerable and exposed to disinformation. So there is a set of tools, and none of them is a magic wand, but if they are applied together, then there could be a solution to manage disinformation.
Thank you. Going back to Ukraine a bit, because we mentioned fact-checking here. I know in Ukraine there's a very active fact-checking website called Stop Fake. Is that something that's beneficial to Ukraine? Is it working? Are people seeing those fact checks? Are they able to be critical of the government and keep the checks and balances?
Yes, we, my union, we support every media, every project who works with fact-checking, and Stop Fake is very good. But when we're discussing about some state regulation and state reaction on disinformation, on fakes, we are afraid that, especially for Ukraine, that our government, every president, use power just for their power, not for solving problem, but maybe for pressure on critical voices, or some we saw as our previous president labeled or divided media, good media and bad media, good journalists and not good, patriotic and patriotic. And then power or government tried to pressure on critical or opposition media. So we are very careful with this discussion, and now we are asking our new president, our new government to organize a very open discussion about future media regulation. when our president or our government receive trust, then we support them. Just after we support just trustful politicians.
And is fact-checking, does it play a role in Tanzanian media landscape?
Fact-checking?
Mm.
Not so much, and that is one of the contributing factors to the press freedom thing, because you know, there is a lack of professionalism in the media, lack of editorial independence because of interference of politicians, businesses, etc. And if you go through our media, I mean newspapers, you know, listen to their content, you find there's a lot of challenges in terms of errors. I mean, in terms of facts, you know, that are not correct, and you wonder that what happened. Some of the most trusted media organizations, and you wonder that how did this something like this slip away. So I just wanted to note one thing, that the challenges to press freedom, the way we see them, the way they are portrayed, you know, in the media and social media in particular, you do see that the attack is focused on the state only. But there are so many things that are our own making as in the industry itself. So there are those things that we as journalists, we need to do. As owners, for example, you know, people are not paid. You know, Gulnara was also touching on something like that. The media houses are not sustainable. The journalists are not paid. Sometimes they go even for a whole year, you know, without pay. And you wonder how these people survive. And if there's something, for example, now there's elections, local government elections this time. There's general elections next year. This is the time when politicians take that advantage. They know that these journalists are not paid, then they tag them along. There is no way you can write anything against the very person that is, you know, giving you a lift to move around during the campaigns. Otherwise, they will drop you anywhere, because it has happened before. Someone is, you know, picked by a president. It could be a presidential candidate. It could be a parliamentary candidate. They move around. The next morning, if they read something that is contrary to what they believe in, they will drop you right there and then. Whether it's a bush or whatever, they will drop you, and you'll find your way back. So there's a lot of things that are happening that are not portrayed, you know, that are not, you know, voiced out, but we only focus on one area in the state, and yes, the state is supposed to take, you know, center stage in everything, but we cannot deny the fact that we also have a role to play in our press freedom.
At the end of this panel, I would like to now take a few audience questions. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but I think we can take a few. You get the mic, so everybody, okay?
Right, thank you. Actually, I want to just make a short observation concerning the press freedom in Finland that Hanna just spoke earlier. I want to make a clarification that, you know, when we talk of, you omitted to actually clarify that any sort of harassing of journalists is not done by states, but it's mainly by non-state actors. And they are usually like right-wing populists or racists or anti-feminists who do not like the particular, journalist's position on certain issues, and then they go on the attack. But it is very rare to really have the state targeting journalists and then thereby causing what do we call it, self-censorship. I mean, it happened to Johanna herself right here. She is a living example of what happened. She was threatened by some right-winger up north, and the whole thing ended up in court, And it was a very typical case to see that, it is actually the public, more or less, or non-state actors here in Finland sometimes, or even maybe as may even happen all across in Europe. So I wanted just that clarification. The other thing is that, you see, journalism is, who we say it's in a crisis, we should also think about the sustainability. The model now is a problem. The situation in which we now are is that the mainstream newspapers do not get adequate funding from advertising, and therefore the funding situation is really critical. And what we have to fight now for, is to really figure out, is it really proper for quality information to go behind a paywall, so that people who can hardly afford rather pay for quality information, Then papers like New York Times and Wall Street Journal and all of these things, they have all run behind paywall. They have become like gated communities. And if you cannot afford, then you go without information. But it now makes that, it is led to a situation whereby it is just the rich people who can afford good quality information. And then the rest of others who cannot afford, we are now satisfied with fake news and misinformation. And this is what we have to also consider in our debate.
Do you want to comment on that?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question. You had like many questions. Would you address one, or about the paywall, or?
What I said, it wasn't a question. All I was saying was that your mention of Finland, press freedom being threatened here, and I was just saying that you forgot to add that it is not threatened from the states, I said, but from right-wingers and racists and anti-feminist people who do not like particular journalists, and then they target them. That's why I mentioned Johan.
Yes, you're quite right. You're saying everything perfectly, telling how it's in Finland. And one of the big, it sounds, when I've been listening to you colleagues, it sounds, of course, quite Western world problem, but the big question in Finland is the problem with the finances in media, of course, and about the paywall thing. That our problems can be that kind of problems. Yes.
Thank you. We have two more questions, and we're not going to take more. It's Mikko and
Thank you. To me, having thought about that, I think the democracy, one of the biggest questions is the media pluralism. And I would like to pose, like, let's say we have quite a set of here, so is the media pluralism, so the amount of good media an issue? Because some bigger will survive. I mean, we see the New York Times getting more subscription, let's hope in some of the national players will do, but what will happen to the media, the plurality, because that's the democracy. So, and while you're probably thinking just of something on the fact-checking, because fact-checking, many people think it's always like, they kind of promote themselves, and fact-checking is not going to solve the problems here. But I mean, actually, I was in South Africa, in Cape Town, in a meeting, and it's a kind of upcoming trend in Africa as well, because it's technologically, it's one of the saviest thing. Because I haven't heard many technology innovation, to be honest, from the media sector that really would do good for the content. And in that way, I just urge all the journalists as well that it's practically the same tools. It's just a different way. I mean, you talk verification, we talk fact-checking. And so there is a lot of potential on that one bringing forward. But yes, the question on the media pluralism, because that's what I'm very worried about.
Who wants to pick that one up?
Should I?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, thank you very much. It's a great question and a great comment that you've raised. And yes, media pluralism is absolutely, totally important for democracy. However, we should remember that, in some states, some countries, the level of polarization is so high that abundance of media outlets wouldn't bring the pluralism in a way how you and I, how we in this room understand it. And I think from this perspective, it's also very important to engage with the audiences, engage offline, how you guys do in Finland, and that's very admirable. You have this Finland Talks and ongoing events for your readership and your audience. So yes, pluralism is very important, but there is also the need to have a culture of tolerant public debate around it.
Thank you. And the last question before we then conclude the day with our from Vikes.
Actually, listening to their stories about Tanzania and Ukraine, I can't but make comparison. Unfortunate one, I would say, because here in the hall there is Ruslan Katsaba, a journalist from Ukraine whose court case has been postponed innumerable number of times since his full acquittal in 2016, while in Tanzania you have Erika Bendera, yes, whose court case has been postponed for 7 times. So there's this kind of tricky. Unfortunately, another Ukrainian journalist who, as far as I know, has been invited to this conference by the Union of Journalists, Vasily Muravitsky, can't be here because he is under house arrest. And this case has been recognized by Amnesty International. It's included, like Katsaba's case, it's included in the State Department report, so it's verified, it's checked, politically motivated grounds are clear. So what is your stance? How do you take these kind of situations? So, and what are you going to do with Erika Bendera, with Moravitsky and Katsaba?
This one is not thank you very much for the question. You see, there is one challenge in Tanzania. If the case is in court, we are not allowed to talk about it. I mean, in terms of commenting what is going on, because it will be like interfering, the proceedings of the court, and that's a fact. So if because it will be like you are influencing now the court, the decisions that will be made by the court. But as for the cases that are not in court, if it's anything that we can do apart from the court, that's what we are doing. Because Golnaro was talking about engaging, and here we are talking about engaging the state. The state in terms of the ministry that is concerned, the ministers and all other players. We can engage them in a way of seeking the position that if we could, if their case can be removed from the court, and people decide to discuss it out of the court proceedings, then there's something that we can do. But what we are trying to do right now, we are doing advocacy from our own part, just influencing, creating an understanding to the key players, that is the state and the other players, of the situation and why it is important, for the press to be free. And we're also doing campaigns, countrywide, to get, the public support. Because also, it's very hard to attain this kind of freedom if you don't have public support. And to gain public support, you need, for them to trust you. There's that case of trust that was talked about here. That's a very big issue also in Tanzania. But how do the media, trust you because of whatever is happening? So it is very hard, and all the issues that are happening. For example, there's a small case where a movie star was having a press conference just like this. And when she finished, she reached to her bag and, pulled some money and, spread to the journalists. And journalists, started fighting. And it's something that was covered in social media and it went viral. And for us in the media, we just attacked the, through statements and all this kind of, condemnation. We directed them to the movie star. But we forgot that we are the ones who have created them. Because each time we go for, stories, we seek for money for the stories to be, written or aired. So you find out that we also, as journalists, have a role to play in these issues. All the problems, yes, there are those which are caused by the state, and I also thank my brother who is now standing, but that for the past 6-7 years, there has been an increasing number of violations from non-state actors. A lot of non-state actors that are violating the media. So, Madam, just to tell you that because the Erika Bendera's case is in court, I find it very hard to comment because, I'm live and, they're listening. So if I comment on anything that they'll tell you, the case is in court, why are you, talking about this? You're influencing the court decision. So I respectfully, pass that.
So what you tell me is that it's us who should tell about him. It's us who should tell about him.
Yes, that's why if we seek international support from you guys, then that is. But if it is out of the court, then from our part, we are doing the advocacy. We are also talking to the relevant authorities, from other avenues. But if the case is in court, that is something else.
Okay, I think this question was directed to Sergei as well.
Okay, and there are many cases of some investigations or accusation against the Ukrainian journalists, which were started by previous presidential team or administration. And now we demand from officials, from secret services, that they should openly reports about every case. And we condemn every violation of rights of journalists, as Vasily Muravitsky said too, and we demand from authority that we shouldn't afraid our government or our authorities that they shouldn't press on journalists in Ukraine. But it's very hard to talk with authority, but we received some first victory because we demanded to organizing special parliamentary hearings about safety of journalists in Ukraine. We demanded more than 2 years, and last week we received this event. Ukrainian parliament, new elected Ukrainian parliament, organized special big parliamentary hearings about safety of Ukrainian journalists, and our influential Minister of Internal Affairs, he supported our initiatives that top level officials from ministry and the chief of national police should be responsible for reaction on violation against journalists, and should every 3 months open a report about investigation about our safety.
Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. I ask you to sit there for just 1 more minute as our country and then we can all leave. Because I'm sure everybody's really aching to get their glass of coffee, which is served over there, and I can see them. But we're going to conclude this day by just a few words about Vikes and its activities. And today we're going to celebrate the 15th anniversary of Vikes. And first of all, I'd like to ask you, all of these things that you've heard today, how does this correlate, how does this communicate with the work that Vikes is doing?
Thank you, Johanna, and thank you all the speakers. I think our main objective of this seminar was to kind of bring different perspectives on this information to the discussion. Like Gennara said, we shouldn't just live in the EU bubble, and we have disinformation is affecting all the countries in the world. We also wanted to learn ourselves, because it's not really like a specialist in disinformation, but as like the whole media sector is changing, I think we have to consider this as well. And it's affecting the countries where we work, currently Myanmar, Tanzania, Somalia, Nepal, Central America. So I think we have learned quite a lot of tools and examples that we can use while we work with our partners, while we train the journalists. We can talk about the importance of quality journalism, fact-checking and things like that, also about the ethics and self-control, I would say, as well. And I think what was also striking is that, okay, this information is here, we can't really avoid it, but we need to manage it.
And lastly, how do you see the next 15 years of Vikes?
Oh, next 15 years. I think, I think it will not be just the same, working with the same kind of journalism and media as until now. I think we've done, because we're doing a lot of training on journalism, but maybe we also have to start working with the audience, because I think gaining the trust in journalism as well. But let's see how it goes. All the hints are welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you who have come here to this seminar today, and thank you for the people who have followed us through the stream on the internet. And just give a big round of applause to Vikes for surviving for 15 years.